And what I did was, well, you all know, if you RSVP'd and you're here, I asked you to submit some questions. So we're going to take some of those questions and we're going to answer them right now. Greg, did I put you up first in the order? The meetup? Okay, I'll have you go first.
All right.
Okay, Greg Madore is going to speak first.
Oh, look at that picture. It's supposed to be funny. Okay. Okie doke. So this title slide starts talking about post-site migration, less PHP errors. There's a lot of errors that can come up after you guys use WP Twin, Duplicator, or you manually move a site from pre-production to production. I'm basically going to talk about one of them, which is less PHP. It's something that I actually had a question about come up recently. And I spent a little bit of time trying to figure out what was going on and found a very simple solution, so I figured I would share that with you. So we're going to talk about a little bedtime story tonight. It's a story about two websites. Those two websites are called development and production. Okay? So development, most folks here have developed a WordPress site. When you guys are developing sites, do you develop them locally and push them to a server? Do you put them on a subdomain, like a dev subdomain? So how many people here develop locally and then push it to a website? Okay. How many people here just develop live and they put like an under construction site up there and, okay. And then how many people put it on like their own subdomain and then move it? Okay. So any of those three things will likely see this problem if you guys are ever using less. Okay. Who here is familiar with what less is? Less, SAS, anything like that? Right? So we'll get into a little bit about what less is in a little bit. We're not going to go deep into it because it's a deep topic in and of itself. But, you know, our tale of two stories here, we're going to start with development. So we did a site. In this case, it is loading currently. It's for this great restaurant and culinary school. Okay. So yes, this is a template. No, this is not an actual site we did. But this is a template that we purchased, and it's all great and fun content. So this development site we built and we tweaked and we did all the things that our client wanted us to do. They signed off on it and said, okay, we're ready to go to production. So now, we used our process to move this site from our subdomain to their site, and we went ahead and did the clone, and we loaded it and said, great, loads up, everything's perfect. Okay? So most would think. Now, in our tale of two sites, we've got the pre-production or the development and our production site. So this looks pretty good. So a lot of folks would say our story's over, but looks can be deceiving. If we, here, we go to transmit. So this is just an FTP client. It's called Transmit, Yummy FTP, CyberDuck. There's dozens of them out there. There's even add-ons for Chrome and Firefox that you can use if you don't want to use a separate program. But if I take this pre-folder and I change the name, all of a sudden when we go back to our wonderful post-production site and we refresh this page, we start to have some problems. So if I zoom this in, that's the error message that we're talking about here tonight. Okay? So this is a less PHP fatal error. We'll get into a little bit about what that means. But you can also see we lost our logo. We lost, well, most of the images are there. We lost our logo here. We lost our social logos. Well, more importantly, if I go through and I click one of these, everybody's seen this.
That's the worst thing to see in the world.
So we never want to see this, especially the night we're trying to go live. So it's at this point that our story takes a little bit of a turn for the worst. So let's pull this back up. So looks can be deceiving. It looked perfect. I turned off my pre-production site and everything went to hell. So our question that I was asked, because somebody called me at the wee hours of the morning and said, I need this site to go live, and I have no idea what's going on. So this is the question. I just moved my site from development environment to the final production site. Now it's generating these less PHP errors. How can I fix that in a way that doesn't involve that? Because killing computers is a bad thing. Because your customer's not going to pay for that computer if you destroy it. So the first thing I always do whenever I get an error message like this is I try to take the error message apart and figure out what it's actually telling me. This is good for computer troubleshooting, this is good for network troubleshooting. Most of the time something's going to give you some kind of error, whether it's printer offline, network offline, or whatever they want to call it. Okay? So less PHP. What is less PHP? Let's start there. It's a compiler for less written in PHP. So what is that? Less is a real-time compiled dynamic style sheet language. Awesome. What does that mean? If you want to know more, if you'd like a deeper explanation, come and talk to me afterwards. I'd be happy to explain more detail about it. Roy can explain more detail about it. But effectively what it does is it's one of the many ways to kind of consolidate your CSS files, make your site load faster. Okay? It does much, much more than that, but that's the kind of top-down approach that we're going to look at. Fatal error. This error is causing less to die. That fatal isn't just thrown out there because it's fun to say fatal. It is actually causing the process to stop. Do not ignore this and hope it'll go away. Do not think it's a cache, like it is a cache problem, but don't think it's just something that's going to vaporize on its own. Okay? It won't go away. The next part, failed to find. Less tried to load something. Okay? What it tried to load is the next part. So this said, okay, I tried to load what all this mess is, and it couldn't find it. And then this part is basically, there's a little break here that they didn't include in their error message, but this is basically starting that whole process again, less PHP fatal error. So ditto, different related file, and it's still less related. So we know that the core of this issue is in less. Okay? So the next question that I say is, okay, it's saying that those files weren't accessible. But those files were transferred using WP-Twin, or duplicated, or your manual process. I can click this path. Hang on. If I click this path, it loads. It's right there. So what does that mean for us? Well, they were transferred. But unfortunately, the cache file that less is actually looking for was transferred as well. And in that cache file, there's a little reference to our pre-production site. Okay? So this is what less PHP does, is it takes the CSS files and it renders these cache files, and then the browser loads the cache files. Yes, sir?
Is all WordPress using less?
No. No. A lot of this is going to be theme dependent. So if you've ever bought themes from Template Monster.
So that, I had a question about that. I did notice that Template Monster, it's compiling live on your site, but isn't that not ideal? Wouldn't it be better to compile locally and then push a non-compiling, already compiled?
We'll talk about that afterwards. Okay. And I'm going to call in Roy to answer that with you and me so I can hear the answer as well. But the nuts and bolts of the story is yes, your less files were transferred. Along with those less files came the cache files that refer back to that absolute path on your file server that's still got that reference to your development environment. So what do? Please forgive me. We're going to trash the caches. Okay? So there's 4 files. Specifically with Template Monster, they have their main parent theme files, and then they have the child theme files, and those are those 4 files. So we're going to start with the parent file. I just called it parent root, whatever your parent theme is or framework is. In this case, I was using this thing called Cherry Framework. So inside that Cherry Framework folder, inside our WP content folder, we need to find inside the less folder 2 files, bootstrap.less.cache and style.less.cache. We very simply use an FTP client and delete those 2 files. In our child theme, we've got a file right at the root of that child theme called style.less.cache. We get rid of that. And inside the bootstrap folder, bootstrap less cache, we get rid of that. So the question is it really that easy? Well, let's find out. So inside here, I need my little cheat sheet. And all my cheat sheet is just those 4 files, so I don't have to. Yeah. Hang on for one brief moment. I will do that for you. Accessibility. Zoom. Oh. Okay. So here's our pre-back folder. We're not going to deal with that at all. We're going to go to WP Content, Themes, Cherry Framework. Inside here, we're going to get rid of less. Bootstrap less cache. Where are you? There we are. Go up a little bit. Pardon my zoom scrolling here. Delete. And then style.lets.cache, which is right down here. Same thing here. Delete. Would somebody mind grabbing that door for me? Thank you so much. Okay, so that takes care of our parent theme. Let's take a look at our child theme. We need to go and delete style.less.cache. Yep, delete. And we need to delete in bootstrap less bootstrap.less.cache. Delete, delete. Okay, there's those 4 files. We're going to go back to our site. Go back to the root of our site.
Go back to the panic page.
Yeah. So when we refresh this, if I did my job correctly, we don't have our error message anymore. Great. We're still dealing with a few things here. We're missing a couple logos, we're missing a couple icons. But aside from that, we still have another problem. So this, while somewhat related to less, is not necessarily something that you'll see in every less site. To resolve this one, this is a good trick for anybody to learn. Don't panic when you see this. Log into your dashboard, which should work even if you're getting this. And so you log into your dashboard. Settings, permalinks. Okay, great. Don't change anything. Okay, just hit save. That tells the database, update what it is you're doing. And now when we go back and reload this, great, we still have our logo problems, but now when we click here, it works. Okay, so that's step 2. Step 3, we have to do one quick little plug-in, and then it will release the floor. Oh, I missed a W. Okay, plugins, add new, and you can do this from the SQL database directly. I'm going to show the plugin just because it's a little bit easier for everybody to do this at home. Search and replace. Now, this is the plugin I use to do this type of a quick thing. Okay, activate plugin. Tools, search and replace. Search for /pre/host. Replace. Go. So it'll tell you if you did what you expected to do. it'll show you 125 replaces in posts, 4 replaces in options. And now, if I did everything I'm supposed to be doing correctly, refresh our page, and I'm failing miserably. What happened here? Well, this is a perfect example. I'm going to release the floor, I'm going to figure out what this is, and then I will get back to you at the end of the next presentation.
You lose.
I lose.
All right, I am going to present next on a problem that I faced. This is a couple of months ago, right before I launched my new portfolio website, premiuminteractive.com. What had happened was one day, unexpectedly, I went to my own website, and instead of bringing up my portfolio website, it flashed on the screen for about 3 seconds, then redirected to a crazy, one of these, you know, one of those websites, it's like a junk website. And so I was like, well, someone hijacked my website. And I don't know, has this ever happened to other people?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. If this ever happens to you, I thought, you know, in that moment for me, and this is right before I launched this site, but I had a few old plugins sitting on that website. Someone wasn't even using anymore. And if you don't keep up to date on some of your plugins, you know, keep updating them, sometimes like there can be an exploit in some, I still don't know exactly how they did the exploit. Roy can tell you when he gets up here. But basically, one of my plugins was creating a problem, and it was redirecting people from Premium Interactive when they access my URL to this junk website. And it creates a panic moment for anybody, you know, if your website all of a sudden is taking people to a junk website, you're like, ah, oh no, every moment that passes, you know, my website's taking people away to some crappy place. Okay, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about, it's actually a really simple fix. And so I wanted to talk about the simplicity of the fix if it ever happens to you. And also what I'd like to do is use this opportunity to share with you guys a tool that I was able to use to get this really simple question answered that I just couldn't see. Like I did my little check thing in the back end of my site, couldn't see what the problem was. And then I reached out to Roy actually through this really great website called Coding Office Hours. And he was able to give me an answer in like 10, 20 minutes. And my website was back up and running. So what's that worth to you? Your whole website goes down. Somebody brings it back in 20 minutes. Anyways, we're going to talk a little bit about that, and this also can be a resource for you guys going forward. You know, if you're developing throughout the month and you don't have a meetup to go to, sometimes something happens in a day where a site goes down, or something crazy, some little weird thing that you can't figure out, some coding thing. You're not, a lot of us here, there may be an area where you're not an expert coder in. You may be really good at some parts of WordPress. For me, I'm like an expert designer. I might be one of the best in the world. No, I'm just effing around. But I'm a really good designer. But in the area of code, since I've DIY'd my way from being a designer over to being a coder, sometimes there's things that I've missed along the way. So it's really great for me to have a resource that I can like go to, which Coding Office Hours, basically to make it simple, you go, you sign up on this website. There are these programmers that are really awesome expert programmers in different areas of expertise in coding. They can answer your pretty simple question, and they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, but the idea is you just leave a tip. So I just went in there, got my answer to my problem, my site was back up and running, and I left a tip. You know, so if you're like doing client work, you may oh, I have a quick question about this, but I don't have enough budget. The client's paying me to do the website design and development. They're not paying me to hire out to someone else. It's just a simple question, you know? This might be a good resource for you too. Somewhere in the middle of the month, you're like, I'll remember to go to Coding Office Hours. and I'll ask my quick question there, and then I'll just leave a tip. It might be worth it. You know, take a little bit out of your budget for a tip. Anyways, so here's the problem. I am going to, actually I'm just going to go into coding office hours and I'll show you the problem, and then Roy, I'm going to have you come up and share the solution, okay? Okay, so the back of the site's still getting developed.
Yes.
So, but the home page is that's why it looks a little different. Okay, so here's my original problem. Basically, I just went in, I put my request in there. You can see it right over here, and I was just telling Roy, you know, my website's redirecting to this mypageresults.com. It's like a junk website. And what I had done is I had turned off a few plugins, hoping that I would somehow trace down the problem of what got exploited, but I didn't shut off all my plugins. Basically, that was it. So I guess I'll let you.
So it's like a general kind of WordPress debugging. When you have an issue like that, there wasn't actually anything I could find that was specific, but anytime someone's like, hey, I just did something and something's going on, I'm like, first thing you got to do is turn off all your plugins. Just general practice. So I told Greg, here you go. It's a plugin issue. Try deactivating your plugins one at a time. If after you deactivate one, the problem goes away, you figure out what plugin is causing the issue. Pretty simple fix. Greg had emailed me his own credentials to the WordPress, so I actually just went in there myself. I did that, and I told him exactly what plugin was causing the issue, and as soon as I deactivated it, issue went away.
Yeah. So that's basically, the solution was not a difficult one, but if, you know, like if I hadn't reached out to him, I probably would have just like spent, I don't know, a couple more hours panicking, you know, like, oh man, what's wrong with my website? Oh no, it's still down. You know, so anyways, you may have like actual real coding. That wasn't even really like a coding thing. It was just like a nice thing to do. If you're having a problem with your website, sometimes just go through and turn off your plugins one at a time.
It's a good debugging method.
Interesting. Yeah, well, hopefully that'll be somewhat legible, even though it's tiny in the middle of this enormous display. Okay, here we go. So I have two questions that were submitted because I'm a greedy bastard, and they pertain to websites that are slow and websites that are full of garbage. So I'm calling this the good, the slow, and the messy. I'm Joe Chellman. You can find me at shoefly.us or shoeflydesign on Twitter. And here we go. So the first question was, what do I do when I've uninstalled a plugin and it leaves behind a bunch of garbage in the database in this case? And so this first part is take out the trash. Did somebody say trash? Okay, this one is actually pretty easy, thankfully. So there are several tools that you can use when dealing with database stuff. When you're looking at the database, you can use phpMyAdmin, which almost any web host will have, or if you use local development products like, I think Desktop Server has it built in. I know MAP does. Most of them include it. There's also things like on a Mac you could use SQL Pro, which is a native Mac app that can connect to any MySQL database or MySQL compatible database. There's another one called SQL Buddy that I sometimes use. It's a little bit smaller than phpMyAdmin, but it's another web app that's written in PHP and will let you get into MySQL databases and look around and do stuff. Now, in terms of figuring out what your nefarious, stupid plugin has actually done, there are two places you can look. There's this. So basically, what you would do is open up the plugin and look for register activation hook, which is the bit of code that will run when the plugin is turned on. And this will, if your plugin is going to create tables in the database or just do, whatever it needs to do when it's activated, other than just exist, that is where you will find it. And so that will be where you should look for references to SQL tables that it would have created. If it's a badly written plugin, it is not going to have this register uninstall hook, most likely. A well-written plugin will have a register uninstall hook function that will clean up after itself. So I don't actually have an example of a bad plugin to show you here, but what we're going to do is we're going to look at a good plugin, GigPress, which is a plugin for managing events for your band or whatever. And I'm going to show you how that looks in these spots. Or I'm going to try to. Yeah, here we go. Wow, this is hilarious on my display. Everything is super tiny. Okay, so GigPress. Let's load that into an editor. Oops. And there we go. Make it nice and big. Okay, so here we go. This is, now, plugins can have lots of different PHP files and stuff. I'm loading the main one for GigPress, which is just gigpress.php. And conveniently, because I've already looked at it, here is the register activation hook. And then here are my functions. Wait a second. Yeah. So I have the GigPress install function. So I need to track that down somewhere. Let's, you could do a multi-file search. Which, yeah, why not? Let's do that. And I think that's what this says. So here,
Software and to search with?
I'm using BBEdit, but any text editor of any that's worth anything will have this function where you can search multiple files at the same time. If your editor does not have that, I totally recommend you go after one that does. So yeah, for BBEdit, there's a free version called Text Wrangler that you can get into. So this function GigPress install is the one that for this particular plugin does all the table stuff. And so you can see it uses constants and all kinds of stuff here. But the point is that you can look for functions like this to then inspect the code if you need to, and then get into your database management doohickey. Yes, that's right. I said doohickey. Whoa, caps lock is on, guys.
Oh, sorry, you can only do it. You have to be local to be able to do a search like that, right? Can you search now?
You can do, I mean, there are different ways to do that if you're on a server. Like if you're a command line person, you could use the grep command. But if not, then I'm not sure what options there might be something in the way of a plugin that could search the actual code. I don't know that for sure because I only do my development locally. You really, really want to get comfortable developing locally. Yeah, you really don't want to be doing that. It's much better, especially if you're going to muck around in the database to do all that stuff locally. So let's go to phpMyAdmin here, and I don't know if this stuff is visible. Let's see. All right. Whoa, baby. So I have a ton of databases over here. I know that the one that this stuff is installed in, I thought I did. Is it this one? Or is it this one? Oh, wait. Which of you friggin' things is it? I don't remember which database it is. Let's take a look. So I'm opening my WP config file, and it says it's WordPress. Wonder if did I already remove the tables? Well, anyway, this is the tool, and if those tables were there, I guess I must have already removed them. Sorry about that. This is where you would find them, and you could look at the code, look for the tables, and then go into this tool, whichever one you like, and then just go, yep, I'm going to nuke this one, and drop them. Yeah, I mean, make sure that you've disabled it and all that, and and operate on a copy of the database when you're doing this. Don't do this the first time, and then try and load your site after you've done it and make sure that you didn't accidentally blow something up. But that is the general idea. Well, if the plugin is written correctly, then turning the plugin off won't usually delete the databases. It's when you uninstall it afterwards. Because deactivating a plugin, it was like Roy said, sometimes you just want to deactivate the plugin and then re-enable it once you've figured out that things are good. Yeah.
There was a plugin I used in forms, and then I decided I didn't want to use it after all. I deleted it, and then I was going to back up because I wanted to back up the database.
Uh-huh.
And it was, and that's what I need to do. It was still showing up the database after I deleted it. So then all of this new as well.
Yep. Just figure out which tables it created and get rid of them.
So then does that mean that their plugin, they had something, like you said, missing that I could completely uninstall?
Yeah, that just means that they did not register a function in the plugin to clean up after itself when you uninstall it. That's it.
I couldn't see this explained that well. Usually are the table names somehow related to the plugin name?
Yeah, I mean, the code will say.
Yeah, okay.
And so usually I mean, again, this is for plugins that are written well.
Yeah.
If they're creating their own tables, it'll usually be like plugin name underscore blah, 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 whatever.
Probably most of your plugins are written well, and you'll see the tables the same.
Yeah, and also a lot of plugins don't create database tables because they don't need to. So you shouldn't expect to see them, but that's in situations where they might be there. That's what you'd be looking for. Okay, so here's part 2, which is that my site is slow. Yeah.
Do you have an opinion about the options, entries made in the options table by a plugin? We don't care about those, right? It's just...
It depends on how big and horrible your database is getting. That's another thing that you can look for. You can look for register options in your plugins and start to remove those as well if you want to. But generally speaking, probably not. You don't have to worry about it so much. But that options table can get pretty gnarly. So, depending on how taxed your database server is, it could be something worth looking at. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what to do when your site is slow. This is a giant question that has potentially lots and lots and lots of answers. So there is not going to be a simple one here, but I'm going to go through some of the things that are relatively easy to address in a general way to try and get some strategies out for anybody who is curious. So when we talk about things being slow, we're getting into an area of development called profiling, which is basically just taking the temperature of your website in some way and figuring out, all right, my site's running slow, but in what way and what specifically is causing that? And the real specifics of profiling are beyond the scope of a fast talk, but suffice it to say that your site could be slow on the back end, which is where WordPress is executing and generating all that HTML and whatnot and sending it out. Or it could be slow on the front end, which is where your browser has collected all the stuff and then it has to put it all together and present the page to the user. It could also be both. So, in the act of when you're Googling stuff for how do I figure out what's wrong with my slow-ass site, profiling is a verb that you're going to want to use in your searches. So a few of the sources of slowness include crappy web hosting, crappy plugins, a crappy theme, or, oh my god, my site is so popular. So we're going to look at each of these points one at a time. So if you're dealing with crappy hosting, what do I mean by crappy hosting? Crappy hosting means things like you are dealing with a web host that oversells. So most web hosting, it's not like you are the only thing on that computer out on the internet. Your account is one of many on a single box, and it's not even necessarily a single piece of hardware. It could be on a single virtual piece of hardware, and then there are a bunch of those on a single box. So there are a lot of web hosting companies that, well, most really, if if you're paying not terribly much for web hosting that are just selling hundreds and hundreds of customers onto every box. And some of them don't have very good strategies for dealing with the fact that they've done this. And so you end up with just resources that are way overtaxed. And who cares, because you're not paying that much. So that's one way. The misconfigured thing, that's kind of related. So there are some cheap web hosts that I like to use personally, but some people don't like them because some people that I've talked to about this particular web host don't like them because they limit the amount of resources that you can use. So if they find that your website is doing something like, say, having page loads that take 30 seconds apiece, they will nuke your site. Or which is to say, they'll nuke the request and just cut it off so it stops. And that way, you're not being the bad neighbor on that server. Other companies might not do things like this, and so there can be misconfigurations or just highly opinionated ways of running the servers that you could be running into that's causing your site to be slow. Crappy does not necessarily mean cheap. There are web hosts that are quite affordable, and I'm talking like $10 a month or less, that are still good, whether it's through resource management or other ways that they've found that they can still support a lot of customers for not a lot of money, but still have things not be awful. If you think your web hosting might be slow, ask around and see what other people like and what they've had good experiences with, and try another one. You can just take your site and install it on a new web host and see if it loads faster. It doesn't take all that long, and it's a pretty cheap fix if you are comfortable doing such things. All right, crappy plugins. How do we deal with those? How do we define what a crappy plugin is? So one way of defining a crappy plugin would be that it's too big and or poorly written. So some plugins that are even written by very popular developers that create WordPress itself could be argued to be too big, not necessarily poorly written, but too big and possibly causing performance problems. So you can just do things like, if you have a copy of your WordPress site locally, just look at how big that thing is, and if it's in the multiple megabytes of stuff in a plugin, you might be looking at something that is just huge and causing your site to eat up a bunch of memory or who knows what. But this is all in the area of profiling actual code, and there are some plugins that can help you with this. One that I've started using relatively recently that I like is called Query Monitor. There's another one called P3, which stands for Performance Profiling Perpetually, I don't know, something. But I've been using Query Monitor lately, and I'm going to show you that in a second. When you're looking for plugins on WordPress.org that might help you with this, you can use the profiling tag to help you find what's out there. Also, if you're somebody who has a little more control over your server, you can look at the MySQL slow query log, which will tell you MySQL can be configured to note when particular queries in your database are taking a long time, where a long time is defined by whatever you say it is. It might be 5 seconds by default or something, but that's another thing that you can look at. But before we do that, I want to show you what Query Monitor looks like. So let's see. Let's do not zooming the text only here. Yes. Okay. So this is a really simple site that is not going to really have any performance problems because it's not really running any plugins or anything. But it does have Query Monitor installed. And just before I was coming up here to load this, I was thinking, how am I going to show what things look like when something goes wrong? Well, lucky me. The first time I tried loading this, it triggered Query Monitor to see red. So basically, this little output that it puts up here in the admin bar is the number of seconds that I can't remember what order this goes in, but it's the amount of memory that that particular page request took when PHP loaded it. It's the amount of time that it took the page to load. It's the amount of time that the queries to the database took, and how many of them there were. Again, I'm not exactly sure what order these two timings are in. I think the first one is the page load, and the second one is the query time. But anyway, it's a little bit of handy profiling that comes right there in the admin bar. And then, when you open up this drop-down, all right, here's the red guy. So something is really wrong here, apparently, or wrong enough to color it red. But you also get links to queries, queries by caller and component, the request that caused this page to load. You get some theme hooks that let you say, all right, well, what's yeah, all right, I'm going a long time. You get some goodies that tell you what kinds of things you can ask in your theme to determine where you are on the site. And so if you click any one of these, it scrolls down to this huge area that is now loaded for you as an administrator that tells you all kinds of information. So again, this one that's red is an HTTP request that, in this case, timed out. I mean, it's a pretty verbose message here. So it timed out after trying to load for a second, and it got nothing back. So if I reload this, everything goes back to normal. So it was just something on that one request where it was trying to do something when WordPress ran cron. Point is, it's a really handy tool that can give you all kinds of information. Even if you don't know what to do with it, if you're working with someone who's more of a propeller head than you are, you can get this plugin onto your site, and then maybe they can, someone who's super savvy can help you figure out what went wrong. Another thing that you can look at is whether you have too many plugins installed. Too many plugins is going to be a subjective judgment, but you may have plugins that you can get rid of. If you're in a situation like that where you just happen to have some older plugins that you're not necessarily using anymore, still enabled, you could disable and delete them to help yourself out there. Crappy often means a plugin that's out of date, but does not necessarily mean a plugin that's out of date. There are some plugins that are old and haven't necessarily been updated, but can still be useful for certain things. But generally, a plugin that is out of date is not a great plugin. So it's just another signal to look at. In general, you want your site to be as lean and mean as possible. So run as few plugins as you absolutely need to get all the functionality that your site requires, and get rid of everything else. Okay, crappy themes. This is a very similar idea to plugins, because in WordPress, themes and plugins are virtually indistinguishable in what they can do to your site, both for good and for bad. You can run all kinds of code in there and cause yourself untold issues, or give yourself all kinds of happy joys. The other thing with themes is that you run into more of the front-end performance issues versus simply back-end ones, but themes can cause both. So that's what you end up having to look at there. One signal that I look for specifically in themes is if they include their own version of jQuery. Instantly, that's 2 thumbs down. 3 thumbs if I had another one. You always want your theme to be dealing with the jQuery is a JavaScript library that's included with WordPress. And so if your theme is including its own version, it's because the developer was a dum-dum and for some reason decided that they needed to load another version of this library to load some particular function that they couldn't be bothered to write themselves or otherwise source, so it works with the current version of jQuery that's already there. I hate this when I see this. You can just look in the theme and, well, there's different ways to do it. You could look at the source of any page on your site when you have that theme active and search for jQuery, and you can find 2 different versions. You'll see jQuery.min.js or whatever more than once. Or you can just look in the actual theme files that ship and just open the folder and look for JavaScript stuff. And if you see jQuery just by itself, not jQuery.plugin name or whatever, then you should be on high alert. Another possible signal is that there's just too many files in the theme. That's not necessarily a great signal, but a theme with a ton of files could just mean that things are being a little slow to load sometimes, or maybe the theme's just too heavy. And you could investigate taking some stuff out for types of things that your site doesn't use, for example, like template files for archive pages that you don't use or what have you. Again, good is things that are lean and mean. Okay, oh my God, my site is so popular. So another possible performance issue is just simply that you have too much traffic for either your web hosting or whatever. So check your analytics. This could be analytics of the Google type or any tool that you can use to measure how many people are visiting your site and just inspecting those numbers. Like, you should be aware of that stuff if your site is slow. And if you happen to know that your site is popular, there are ways that you can deal with that. The first and the easiest way is to use a cache plugin. WP Super Cache is one that's written by Automatic. It's good. It does what it's supposed to do. And what it's supposed to do is take WordPress pages. So what happens when you go to like your WordPress site is WordPress loads up a bunch of stuff from the database, does a bunch of programming magic, and ships it out to the browser every single time someone hits the page, and every time someone hits any page. This is not nearly as fast as the way websites used to be, where it was just literally a file on disk on the server that the web server could just grab and ship out without any programming intermediation. And so these cache plugins will do that work for you, so that when somebody goes to your homepage, instead of doing all that rendering and WordPress stuff, it just grabs the file, ships it out. Much, much, much faster. Another thing that you can consider if you are dealing with a site that needs to be highly dynamic, if you have a lot of users, if it's like a community site where people are logged in all the time, where a cache plugin doesn't necessarily do such a good job, or you just need things to be hitting the database all the time to keep everything right up to the second updated, you could look at paying for higher powered web hosting. If you're using a shared super cheap version, you could look at migrating to a VPS. If you're on a VPS and things are breaking down, you could look at scaling up somehow in VPS or going to dedicated or whatever. But paying more for your web hosting is another option. And if you're a giant nerd, you can start looking at things like substituting the highly popular Apache web server that most of us use for Nginx, which is a lot leaner and faster. You could also, instead of using a cache plugin, you could look at things like Varnish, which is a layer that sits on top of your WordPress site and does all that same caching for you, but doesn't run in WordPress itself. And then there's also things like APC, which is a caching plugin for PHP that will take PHP code and bundle it up in a sort of pre-compiled version, so that anytime somebody wants to run a PHP function, that is, WordPress wants to run a PHP function, it's already cached and run, and it makes things a ton faster. There's also memcached, which takes WordPress stuff or database stuff or whatever and loads it into memory, so things aren't loading off disk on your server, they're loading out of memory. Those are all things that if your site needs to be really, really, really fast, you can look into. Odds are most of us are not going to need that stuff. Another option that you can look at is what you might call headless WordPress, and this is something that I know Roy is really into. This is where instead of loading WordPress directly for every single request, you use WordPress as it's like the Wizard of Oz, and it stands behind the curtain, but you never see it. So you have a theme that makes requests of WordPress using JavaScript, and then it sends all that data out to the browser, where the browser does all the work for you. I'm not going to go into the details on that, but it's the new hotness, people. It's nifty, and yeah, it's another area that could result in WordPress sites being very convenient to administer, but being much faster on the front end. Yes, sir.
CDN, also very good.
A CDN, yes. So a CDN is that stands for Content Distribution Network, and the easiest way to do that is you end up with all of your static assets, your images, your JavaScript files, all that kind of stuff is sitting on is automatically mirrored basically to this other server that then loads all that stuff for you. So instead of your own web hosting account having to ship all those assets out, it handles that stuff for you, and that makes everything load a lot faster. Yes.
And there's another thing to look at, which is if you have little widgets installed, JavaScript widgets, and maybe calling out to another server, like share it, or something like that, those can get slow and really make your life hard.
Yep. Yeah, so there's all kinds of things to look at. Those are a few of them, and yes, Benno.
I have one question. The one with the menu options, that was the query model.
Yeah, that's Query Monitor. And I'm way over my time, so thank you.
You did good. You're fine. Because we actually had a speaker not come out tonight. Suzette was going to speak. So you did
okay.
perfect. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.